Beyond Science, Conversations with Arthur M. Young. Interviewer Charles Fauvre discusses issues of science and consciousness with Arthur Young, honored inventor of the Bell helicopter, philosopher, and author of the Reflexive Universe. Today, The Theory of Process, Part 1, and Introduction to Young's comprehensive theory of evolutionary development.
Hello, Arthur. You've been working on the theory of process for many years, and you've published several books in that regard. Yet, there aren't a great many people who are intimately familiar with the theory. I wonder if you could provide us with a brief introduction and maybe start with telling us why you call it a theory of process.
Well, my search for a theory led me originally into interest in relativity, but I found it was unsatisfactory because it didn't recognize time, the basic asymmetry of time, the feeling of becoming you get from time with novelty, things coming by surprise. And so I wanted to honor time with this role of creativity, of changing, and called it theory of process. It starts with the basic concept that purpose is the spark that initiates process, and purpose goes to a goal.
That's a beginning and an end.
Yes.
All right.
But it's not a spatial beginning and end. It's you could say it's in time.
I love your idea of honoring time and having the feeling of becoming. It really feels good to me. And you put this into scientific parameters.
It contrasts sharply with the scientific view of an instantaneous photograph or picture showing everything, not only in space but in time as fixed points. This was the idea that appealed in classical physics, especially, that you could formulate everything.
I'm wondering if first, wouldn't it be better for our audience if we came back to the very basic principles of your theory? Could you tell us about them?
Right. Well, I have to introduce it with the word purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That was what wasn't used in science. But if you recognize that it's purpose that's the seed for process and takes it to its goal, then you can see it quite simply, that process has to go through stages to reach the goal. And these stages are, as it were, means. If you want to get to the top of the mountain peak, you have to get food and equipment and climbing tools, tent, all those things. You have to get the means to get there. And the means make these stages. Or you could think of it as increasing degrees of complexity, or increasing levels of organization. And the stages of process are levels of organization.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the kingdoms of nature give a very good example of this. Remember the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms of Aristotle.
Yes.
But now that we have science, we know there are kingdoms prior to mineral. So a mineral would be molecular. We have to go to the atomic because molecules are made out of atoms.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to go to nuclear particles because atoms are made of protons and electrons. For a while I was stuck there until I finally realized the final unity would be light, because light creates is what's called pair creation. It creates a proton and an antiproton.
Pair creation.
Right.
Light creates both of these.
Right. The
With different
particles
qualities.
that make the atoms are created by light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, following through then, you have light, nuclear particles, atoms, molecules, plants. See, plants begin with cells, so cell is the next unit above molecules.
Mm-hmm.
And then with animals, you get a new principle, and finally man. So that makes 7 stages. Now these stages are building on one another, so they're cumulative. Each one contributes, makes a new contribution. I call it a power.
A power.
Power. And that provides a scheme for any process. It's not just the kingdoms of nature. For example, you could take language. The reason I like language as an example, because it emphasizes the difference between the means and the goal.
I see. How does it do that?
Well, the language has no purpose. You see, I ought to fall into the same word. What's the purpose of language? To communicate. I am now trying to communicate with you. What is behind it is the thought or the meaning. The language is only a means, an outer garb for this.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that the process of communication involves just the same steps. The most elementary would be the binary grunts, no or yes, and then you get letters, and then you combine the letters into words.
And what stage would words be equivalent
Words
to?
would be the fourth, that is, what I call the combination stage, would correspond to molecules. Remember, molecules are combinations of atoms. So words are combination of letters. And just as there are a limited number of letters, so if you had an infinite alphabet, wouldn't be any use.
True.
And similarly, nature has a finite alphabet of atoms. There are only 92 in nature. But you get an unlimited number of combinations, that is, molecules or words. You can always keep on making new words.
Yes.
And it's when you endow the word with a meaning. See, you've been going out into the means business, trying to get all these words, but it's when the words have a meaning that you're ready to go home and convey the thought. Well, what do you do with the words? Each word has a single meaning.
Yes.
You combine them you organize the words into sentences or paragraphs, and it might be chapters, books. The degree of organization is still in the same stage. It can get very complicated, but it's still organization. That's what I call the fifth stage. The stage after that is more subtle. In nature, it's animals. Animals, mobility, transformation, because they have to change their shape in order to move.
So if you saw a silhouette of an animal, it would start
You
to...
try to draw an animal, you realize how much he changes his shape.
Interesting.
Well, this is perhaps a difficult one, so bear with me. we're talking about the sixth stage of language. You would think, well, that's some more complicated thing than a paragraph, say a book. But it really is quite different. You shift into a totally different category. You try to sell the idea. You try to see, after you've manufactured the product, that's the plan stage. Then you try to move it. You try to get it going. You're actually selling it, because it has to do with value. Now, in terms of my communicating to you, it would be when I could, so to speak, persuade you that this had meaning for you, had value for you. See, there are really two definitions of meaning. The dictionary definition, which is called the efficient definition, it helps you to make it. Say, what is a house or something? Well, you get directions for how to make it. But the meaning to you is a different thing. The meaning to you depends on your sense of value of the thing. And selling has to do with persuading people that they need the product. Now,
you would feel a need.
You feel the need, right. So only when I had succeeded in all of those steps would I do the last one, that is, convey the thought to you. See, if you didn't feel the value of the thought, if you didn't buy it,
Yes,
I would have failed in
Yeah.
my explanation. I could give you a lot of definitions from physics that wouldn't interest you at all. I have to get to you. So now again we see that process is dealing in a much more complete way with what the universe is all about. It's not just something out there which you don't need to be in it at all. I mean, the Newtonian universe had nobody in it. There was nobody minding the store.
Arthur, can you take these concepts you've mentioned about words and tie them back into the kingdoms that you mentioned before?
Yes, I neglected that. See, this covers any process, so I should be able to do that. Now, we noted that the alphabet is like the alphabet of atoms, at a finite number, and from that you get unlimited combinations of molecules or words. But the point where the word is endowed with a meaning begins what I call the ascent. But to get the meaning, it has to go back to number one, because your thought was what you wanted to convey to the other person. So that's the, as it were, non-physical element that's being incorporated in the word. Now, in terms of molecules, that's when the molecule starts to organize itself in order to move upward. The polymers are the first molecules to do. They actually store energy and move against the flow of entropy. And that's already been...
explain that term entropy for us before we go on?
Entropy is the tendency of things to get wasted. It's as though you could get energy from a waterfall, because the water's falling down. But if all the water fell down into one big pool, you wouldn't have any energy from water.
That would be it.
That's entropy.
All right.
Now, negative entropy is when something puts the water back or pushes the things back up again. And that's what trees do when they grow.
I see.
You couldn't get stones to roll uphill, but trees are moving molecules up.
Okay. So
So that's the restoration, the ascent
The
going
ascent.
back.
Okay.
And it begins with negative entropy. But what people who study this subjects, they've equated negative entropy with meaning, order. This is a very interesting recent step in science. See, order is a mental word, an intangible. And you wouldn't think that energy was in any way intangible. Energy is the most tangible thing there is.
Yes.
But it's not the energy, it's the storage of energy that's the intangible and corresponds to order.
I see.
So that matches the fifth, which is plants, to the sentences which are stating the meaning.
I see. And next we have the animals.
Right. The connection of animals to this value meaning is difficult to establish, but it's important. Animals are going for different goals. They're the first ones to have choice. Now, choice is based on value. And this is a non-intellectual thing. I mean, of course, animals are non-intellectual, but it's non-intellectual on the human level because it's, as I said, the value to you of what I'm saying. So this is very much like how you move an animal. You give him something to eat if you want him to do something.
All right. I wonder if we could go back now and sum this all up into the basic theory again.
Right. Well, we have this theory of process, begins with purpose. Purpose, to get to the goal, has to have means, and the means have to be determinate. And this results in stages. Each stage develops a new function or power, and gets a higher and higher levels of what you could call organization. But the trouble is that it includes more than organization. That value thing, for example, is not organization, but it's beyond organization.
Something else, I've heard you talk about freedom and constraint. I wonder if you could describe
That's
how they
an alternative, well, it's a way of defining the stages, but it's an alternative explanation.
All right.
You see, we said that the means have to be determinate. They have to work for sure. And to get that determinism, you have to have more and more constraint. The first constraint is in time, and the next in space, and then in time and space together. Just if I say, well, I'll meet you at the corner of Ashby and College, you'll say, when? You want more constraints. I could say, I'll meet you tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and you'd say, where? To get the complete picture, you have to have the time and the place. So to get to that total constraint, you need these levels down. It's first time, then space, then both together. Similarly, on the way back to the goal, to get the freedom, you have to overcome the constraints. And the plants at the fifth overcome the constraint of time by creating seed that lives after them.
I see.
And the animals overcome the constraint of space by their ability to move. And man presumably overcomes both constraints by his ability to work toward long-term goals beyond his own lifetime.
Beyond his own lifetime.
Well, I'm trying to indicate no particular limit.
Yes. All right. How about telling us a little more about what the turn,
The
that
term,
concept?
this unites science and religion very concretely, you might say, because in religion it's the virgin birth. It's the cause that doesn't have any father, and no prior cause. So it's first cause. It's a rebirth of the first cause at the beginning. In science, it's the beginning of negative entropy. When this wasting away of the second law of thermodynamics is reversed into the opposite. I've just seen from a scientist that this is symmetrical, negative entropy and entropy. But there's all the difference in the world. They're not symmetrical.
They're not symmetrical.
The wasting of energy, you could say, is symmetrical with a storage of energy, but the storage of energy alone won't do it. You have to have the option to store or release energy if you're going to grow. Just storing energy would not make a thing grow. See, suppose you had a business that
Yes.
would only take in money. They couldn't make any investment. They
Right.
couldn't buy themselves car fare to
Yeah.
to go to work.
Yes.
You have to expand, and it's the beginning of intelligence and consciousness.
I see.
And I think this scientist's effort to make it symmetrical was this sort of unwritten law they have to rule out intelligence.
To rule out intelligence.
They want to have it all working according to formulas.
I see.
Whereas this working against entropy, negative entropy, requires actual effort. You don't have to call it intelligence, but it requires, for instance, if you're wrestling with someone, you don't win the match by principles or laws. You do it by timing and intelligence, knowing when to do the right thing. And that, fortunately, can't be eliminated from the cosmology.
I see.
It was eliminated in the Newtonian cosmology, but that was why Blake accused Newton of single vision.
Do you feel then that you have uncovered some sort of formal law here that underlies all existence?
Well, yes, and I don't think that I've uncovered it. Well, it was written into the ancient teachings, and I've brushed the dust off, and there it is. All these, I think science has helped me a great deal to interpret these ancient teachings. I mean, there's 7 this and 7 that, which sounds so superstitious. I can now show with set theory why it stands up under analysis.
I see.
And I can, I think if you can show me there are more kingdoms, I'd like to see them. But you know, atoms, molecules, etc. That's about it. I mean,
So you're really using science as a tool to describe a context that's much larger than just science itself.
Well, I think what science, they've been working hard for 200 or 300 years, and we can't throw that away. That's very important. It's just that they haven't read their own findings. They haven't really recognized how big this stuff is.
So you're recognizing a much larger implication.
With the help of the ancient teachings, which give you the kernel of it without, you know, they give it in symbolic language. You have to really understand what they're talking about to get the message.
This seems to me sort of like a map that includes more than just the physical universe.
Right. Well, when you use the word map, you imply that it's all relationship structure, which is what science deals with. And I would like to point out that it is including things that are not relationship structures. Well, what's not a relationship structure? That which directly relates to you. See, in other words, the map doesn't touch you, but this is a map that you're in, or a map that you have to be related to. Values, for instance. Values relate to you, or to me, and it's impossible to put that part on the map.
I'm still fascinated by your concepts regarding light, and I wonder if you could work that in a little more.
Well, that, of course, is the most important thing and puts it all together. You see, you have to think of this as light investing in means to get to its goal, which is spiritual again. It goes from spirit to spirit, but it's not the same place when it gets back to spirit. It's acquired the values, gained the experience of the lower part of the arc.
Through consciousness.
Through getting consciousness and competence, I'd rather say than competence.
Competence.
Right.
All right.
But realize that values are part of the means. You see, most people equate value and purpose. And notice carefully that on the way down, you're captivated by values, you're captured. And on the way back up, you're able to use values to accomplish goals. This is what the animal does by knowing, it runs and chases things, but it does this in a non-compulsive way. It animates itself by its interest in chasing things.
Okay.
Watch the dog chase the
Yes.
stick. He's able to use values.
Yes. I think it's time to wrap it up again
Okay,
for today.
all right.
And I will look forward to continuing the explanation next time we meet.